Hey guys, John here. Today we're in Avenger 2, and today's patch we're going to be working on formants within the EQ. If you're unsure what that is, that's totally fine. Just stick with me here. We're going to be making something kind of like this here. So yeah, something kind of acidy, techno-y kind of vibe. So for this patch, I have distortion and drums on a macro, so we can take off our drums. Take our distortion off. Which is still actually a pretty cool sound. And then we have cutoff, resonance, and the depth, which deals with the filter envelope right over here. But basically, we're not going to be remaking this exact patch one-to-one. We're more so going to be working on this concept, which then you can take and apply to a lot of other different stuff. And you can make a lot of different recipes with this concept kind of as the forefront or the main driver of this type of sound. So if we go to menu, initialize, we have our sound wave, which I always say it's uninspiring, but I'm kind of lying there. It actually is kind of inspiring. So for this patch, we're gonna have some unison here. So 4 voices is probably fine. Let's increase our mix here. So we have something like that. And then for our second oscillator, we want to have a little bit more meat on the bottom end, so something rich and thick. So let's bring this down by 1 octave with our scroll wheel, and let's change this from a saw to a square wave. So that's pretty thick. All right, so we have something like this now. The first thing that we want to do is start building our formants, which is the essence of this type of sound. So on our FX1 here, we have to make sure that both of our oscillators are going to be routed there. So oscillator 2 is routed to out FX1, which is this stack. And then oscillator 1, same deal here, out FX1. So let's right click here and let's add an EQ. So we have a couple bands to work with. So if we drag and drop our LFO to frequency 2, and this is 1K right now, we can double click this and let's bring this down to 500. And we're going to adjust these values later, but this is kind of a starting point. So our gain is going to be pretty substantially crazy, like 12 dBs. We're going to have that type of sound. So now once we go to our mod matrix, and let's give this a little bit of depth here. So this kind of just sounds like a filter that's kind of moving back and forth, right? Okay, cool. So next, what we need to do is our LFO. We don't really necessarily need a sine wave for this guy. I mean, you could, but for this demonstration, we're going to right-click this here, maybe go for a ramp down. And it's continuously cycling, right? It's the nature of an LFO. But in this case, let's go to one shot, and we can maybe change our polarity if we'd like to. But for now, let's leave it here. So we have that kind of sound. Now, if you notice, if I hit some notes, it's only going to re-trigger, as it says here, on the first MIDI note. So for this patch, let's change this to the last MIDI note. Okay, so we have something like that. Now, the next thing to do is grab the same LFO and drag and drop on frequency 3, which is 4K right now, but we're going to change this to 5,000, so 5K. And we're going to do the same thing with our gain, bring this up kind of crazy stupid like that, past 12. And we go back to our mod matrix. Now, the first one is this 48 depth right here. Now, take a listen to what happens once we start going into negative territory with this other band. You almost have that yah kind of like formanty, almost human type of sound in there. Okay, so we have something like that. Now, we could use the formant stuff inside Avenger for this type of purpose, but it is kind of cool doing this within the EQ, kind of gives you a lot of different stuff to play with. And here on the channel, we like playing with things. Okay, so this is kind of the main concept. So how do we bring this out a little bit, I guess, more interesting? So generally, I would like to add a compressor here because it's a little kind of crazy. Maybe some out gain. Okay. So we got this guy, and again, not again, I think it's the first time mentioning in the video, but keep in mind with these types of patches, right, we're looking at our EQ. These are some pretty high notches or peaks right over here. So we do sometimes have to watch our levels at the very end. We can go and tailor things, but just something to keep in the back of your mind. Okay, so we have this. Now, to spice this up a little bit, maybe we can go right-click here, go to our delay. And now we need to work on this a little bit here. So let's take some of that low end out. We don't really want that. And also the high end, it's a little bit too much. reduce our mix a little bit here, and then that might be okay. Okay, so we have our core sound built up, maybe a little bit of reverb. I do like this V-verb for these types of patches, but we do want to bring down the pre-delay because it's kind of much, maybe anywhere between 15 and maybe 20 is okay. The decay is pretty long, 3.5, so we can bring that down. Also less mix here, and then a little bit more dampening. Okay. We have something kind of cool here to work with. Now, the patch I showed before was an Arps, so let's go ahead and work on that guy. So for oscillator 1, let's route this to ARP1, same as oscillator 2. Let's route this to ARP1 as well. So we have that. So we have our ARP here. Now maybe we want to add our filter, and for this kind of sound, I do like using this low pass, or is it here at the bottom, this TB low pass 18, which is really kind of screams to use this filter for this type of sound. Lots of resonance, by the way, too. So we're kind of getting that acid sound. Now, if you notice, the ARP itself is going to be triggering this filter here. However, this LFO is only once we hit some notes. So what's really cool about Avenger is if we look at our ARP here, we have all these notes, but we can change this LFO to say, hey, I want this LFO to re-trigger from the ARP. So you kind of get that sound there. Now, all these notes like this here is kind of excessive, so we can kind of clear this out and maybe make some kind of rhythm. Maybe something like this here. Right, a little bit of groove there. Okay, so we have that kind of main thing, and we can always bring in a drum kit here. So I do like stuff in the EDM category if you have that pack there, EDM 4, and we can go to this classic kit. Okay, so we have kind of the flavor. We kind of know where we're going to be going with this. Now, what are some things that we can do to spice something like this up? So one of the main things if we're doing this kind of sound is going to be distortion, and a nice one for that can either be one of the plugins in here or using the shaper, which is also really, really cool. So in our first oscillator, let's go add this plus here, go shaper 1, and for this, grab the shaper and bring it underneath the filter. So this actually gets processed after the filter, which is really nice. So we have filter 1, and then we have our shaper, and then same thing for the oscillator 2, same deal, bringing it underneath the filter. So now this is routed, now we need to give it some distortion. So there's definitely a difference here, and now once we can have a good amount of distortion, we can kind of find out where in the frequency spectrum we want this to happen in. Now, with this knob here, it's really cool to modulate. Even just a little bit of motion can make the sound really cool. So for that, we're going to use another LFO and drag and drop LFO2 on this guy, and then maybe give it just a little bit of depth here to work with. And we have to kind of think to ourselves, how do we want this to function? So a sine wave probably won't be the best call, so we can right-click this here. Maybe do a ramp down and bring the polarity, so make this offset all the way to the right to make this a unipolar signal. And from here, you can kind of choose where do you want this knob to be at manually, and then where do we want the modulation and how deep we want that. So that's kind of excessive, but also kind of cool. Okay, so we have something kind of cool like that. All right, let's leave that for now. Maybe a tiny bit less of that modulation. But then we can add some different notes here. So we have cool rhythm, maybe bring this up an octave. And like I did in the last patch, I think it was this guy or one of these guys I just brought up by 3. do something kind of like that. So now we have kind of a core sound pretty much for the most part built. There's kind of the main components there. So now the fun of this is once we have all this done, we can go back to our EQ and we can now decide where we actually want to change these numbers here. And even if we want to have a bipolar or a unipolar signal for LFO1. So let's go ahead and try that, because remember, this is bipolar. So if we go all the way up here, it's going to be just going in positive direction. So if we double click this again here, notice how these are going to go kind of past each other. Whereas if we do this guy here, it's kind of confined in here. Now, the two main things to kind of tailor this sound is going to be, where are these frequencies going to be set at? And then also, what are the depths of these different different destinations from LFO1. So for example, we can start moving this frequency around and seeing what it sounds like. So for here, we have what, 792, maybe bring that down a bit here. So let's say we're working with something like this. So back in LFO1 and the mod matrix here, we can start adjusting our depths to something that we like. So we have that. Also, now that I'm thinking about it, skip some filter drive. Okay, so that's kind of cool as well. Now, within our LFO, there's a lot of different things we can do with this guy. So right now we're just on this down saw right over here. We can right click this so we can do even something random so it's not as predictable. Maybe a little bit more delays, that might be kind of interesting. And keep in mind, in our EQ, we also have a couple other bands to work with if we want to. And then also we have a lot of effects to go through as well. So we can bring our timed effects down over here. And then we can right click here. And maybe, for example, if we want to add some extra distortion to that, we can do a multiband. This one's kind of cool as well. And then again, with this type of sound, the filter, where the filter's at and how much depth it has, also plays quite a significant thing to the sound, and the decay of that filter as well. So it's kind of move these around and kind of see how that changes it. So yeah, definitely a cool sound there. Also, I do like adding some of the dimension as well. So if we kind of turn these effects off, we can right click this guy here, and then we go to this guy. Kind of opens it up a little bit. And then we can always try it out with some different drums here, maybe this clip kit. So we have that. So now another cool thing inside Avengers. Now we made this pretty simple ARP pattern here, right? A couple different notes, a little interesting rhythmic pattern. We can go over here to the presets, and there's a lot of different stuff that we can choose from. If you want something like that in the different expansions, we can choose those different ARPs. So right now we can look at Techno and let's see, Acid Rain. Like, that's actually pretty cool there. Let's go to the next one, Acid Slider. got that mechanical vibe too. The slides really kind of play that out as well. It's really awesome. So what else we got? Love Kit. Actually, I kind of like this kit here. So another cool thing at the very end here. Now, depending if we want to mini chain this, if we want to do this pre-reverb or post-reverb, I kind of think it's a little bit cool doing it afterwards. So let's bring this mini chain in here and change our sync to our bass, or bass drum, I should say. And you know, while we're at it here, it might be kind of interesting to add another LFO and maybe move the panning or something like that. Bring this guy to the left and kind of just move it like that. And then for this LFO, let's go to a random spot every single time. And maybe eighth notes are kind of interesting. I'm just kind of moving around the stereo field, but we do want to have this actually unipolar. And then you can do some interesting stuff, adding the macros to the cutoff, resonance, maybe the depth of the envelope. That's kind of a cool thing. The drums, distortion. And then also some sync can be actually interesting as well. Yeah, so kind of things like that would be interesting. Maybe some FM. So now it's kind of the point where you kind of have a core thing built out, and then you can kind of just think, what can make this a little bit more interesting? And then you start adding it, and it just becomes its own thing. But that's kind of the beginning of Formant type patching. Now, you don't always have to do it like this. You can use like the Formant stuff or use like Formant filters. But I think it's kind of interesting inside the EQ because you can really dial things in. I mean, maybe even adding this fourth one. Let's kind of see what that's going to sound like. So our first one is a modulation of that. So grab this LFO. Let's go to the fourth one. And maybe, I guess, this guy. Let's do 100 and see how that works out for us. And also, we can always tighten up this Q as well. So all these different bands that we have, we could really tighten these up like that and see what that sounds like as well. So it's actually kind of fun to play. Did everybody hear you scream or something stupid? And there you go, which is kind of a relatively simple patch to make, but these ones are a lot of fun to do. And keep in mind, this is only using 2 oscillators, so you could have like a bass that's really low that kind of just hits the upbeats or downbeats or whatever it is you decide you want. So what might be kind of interesting, let's say, oscillator 3. Let's give this guy a new amp, a new filter, and then we're going to go a new effect stack. And then for oscillator 3, let's go filter 2, and let's go amp 2, effects 2 as well. So if we muted these 2 guys, and maybe our drums, basically have a default saw wave, maybe drop this down an octave. Filter 2, this guy, maybe the 24. Go to our ARP and then add another ARP and then send this guy to ARP 2. So we have that kind of going for us so far. And then add our EQ to this guy and then open this guy up. And maybe for the first one, we can do a high pass, something kind of like this. And then some EQ and compression. And maybe some distortion. That might be kind of interesting too. Maybe a little dimension. Why not? Okay, that's kind of interesting. So with this being said, so maybe we can close these two like this, something like that. So it's kind of doing those upbeats. Another one here. Let's remove those guys. Maybe we can actually distort this guy a little bit more to kind of make it a little bit more obvious. That might be kind of cool. And then maybe distort it one more time with our regular distortion. And some effects as well, maybe a delay, something like this. Let's see how that sounds with everything in there together. Bring this one up too. Might be cool to add some voicings to this guy as well. See, this is the kind of cool thing, like you build this patch and then you kind of just add things onto it and see how it turns out. And then maybe if we muted these drums here, maybe for the first stack, kind of bring it down, I guess. So yeah, without further ado, that's pretty much something kind of cool you can make with this patch, just kind of basing it off the formants, and then everything kind of comes together later on to that. But yeah, go ahead and try to make something like this and you'll be surprised how much fun it is to make. So yeah, thank you for watching. Hopefully you learned something. It went a little bit longer than intended, but hopefully now you have some cool ideas to make some patches. So yeah, thanks for watching and we'll see you in the next one.